The blinding red and blue lights paint a terrifying kaleidoscope in the rearview mirror. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, it's a familiar sight, but never from this side. The officer approaches his hand, already resting on his holstered weapon, his eyes filled with a chilling mixture of authority and disdain. Within seconds, a routine traffic stop spirals into a nightmare. A gun is drawn, pointed not at a suspect, but at a decorated federal agent. He laughs at her badge, a hollow, mocking sound that seals his fate. But he doesn't know the woman he's threatening is the lead investigator on a case that has his entire department in its crosshairs. He thinks he holds all the power. In 2 minutes, he'll learn what true power looks like, not from the barrel of a gun, but from the cold, hard click of handcuffs around his own wrists. The air in Oak Creek, Georgia was thick enough to drink a humid cocktail of summer heat pine needles and freshly cut grass. It was the kind of picturesque small town that appeared on postcards with a white steepled church, a town square, dominated by a stoic Confederate monument, and residents who offered a sweet tea and a sweeter smile. But Dr. Evelyn Reed knew that beneath the syrupy charm of towns like Oak Creek, darkness often festered like a rot. She drove a nondescript 10-year-old Toyota Camry, its engine humming a tune of reliable mediocrity. Her clothes were equally unassuming comfortable jeans, a simple grey t-shirt and worn-in sneakers. Her hair, a cascade of intricate braids, was pulled back into a simple ponytail. To any casual observer, she was just another woman passing through, perhaps visiting family, or searching for a slice of pecan pie at the local diner. That was precisely the image she intended to project. In reality, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a Ph.D. in forensic psychology, was Special Agent Reed of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She was the tip of a very long, very sharp spear, and for the past 6 months, she and her team had been methodically aiming that spear at the heart of the Oak Creek Police Department. The investigation, codenamed Operation Southern Shield, was a multi-pronged deep dive into allegations of racketeering evidence, tampering, and a horrifying pattern of civil rights abuses, targeting minority drivers along the I-75 corridor that skirted the town. Evelyn was in Oak Creek for the final phase verification. She was the ghost, the unseen observer meant to corroborate the intel her sources had fed them. She was confirming patrol routes, response times, and the behavioral patterns of the key officers involved. Today's target was a man whose name appeared in nearly every complaint, Officer Michael "Mike" Callahan. Callahan was a local legend, a high school football star who had traded his helmet for a badge. To the town's majority, he was a hero, a bulwark against the perceived threats of the outside world. To others, the ones whose voices were systematically silenced, he was a predator who wore a uniform. The files on him were thick with accusations of illegal stops, shakedowns for cash, and brutal intimidation, yet no formal complaint had ever stuck. They all vanished within the opaque bureaucracy of Chief Dale Brody's department. Evelyn checked her rearview mirror for the 10th time in as many minutes. She wasn't speeding. Her registration was current. She'd made a full 3-second stop at the last sign. She was a model citizen in a ghost skin. She was about to turn onto the county road that would loop her back toward the interstate when the world exploded in red and blue behind her. Her heart didn't leap. It sank. It was a cold, heavy feeling she recognized from her training. This was it. Not how she'd planned it, but it was happening. She took a deep, centering breath, her eyes flicking to the passenger seat where her purse sat. Inside, nestled beside her wallet, was her badge and service weapon. Protocol was clear. Remain calm, comply. and de-escalate. She pulled the Camry smoothly onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching to a halt under the shade of a massive Spanish moss-draped oak tree. She killed the engine, rolled down all 4 windows, and placed her hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions, just as she'd been taught at Quantico. The lights of the patrol car strobed violently, turning the peaceful afternoon into a chaotic disco of authority. A car door slammed. The crunch of boots on gravel grew louder, slower than she expected. He was taking his time, asserting dominance, before a single word was spoken. Evelyn kept her eyes fixed on her own in the rearview mirror, her face a mask of placid neutrality. The face that appeared in her driver's side window was exactly as the surveillance photos had depicted, but harder, crueler in person. Officer Callahan was a man built like a fire hydrant, with a thick neck and a florid complexion that spoke of high blood pressure and a short temper. His sunglasses, reflective aviators, hid his eyes, but the sneer on his lips was perfectly visible. Beside him, slightly behind, stood a younger, leaner officer, whose name she knew was Davis. He looked nervous, his eyes darting from Evelyn to his senior partner. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Callahan's voice was a low growl, thick with a southern drawl that he seemed to weaponize. "Ma'am, you in a hurry to get somewhere?" Evelyn kept her voice even and respectful. "No, officer. I was driving the speed limit." "My radar says otherwise," he lied, tapping a thick finger on her window frame. "Says you were weaving, too. Like maybe you've had a little something to drink this afternoon." He leaned in closer, making a show of sniffing the air. "License and registration." Evelyn maintained eye contact through the mirror. "They're in my purse on the passenger seat, officer. I'm going to reach for them now very slowly." "You do that," Callahan grunted. She moved with deliberate, measured slowness, her hands always visible. She retrieved her wallet and the vehicle's registration from the glove box, then turned back to face him, holding them out the window. Callahan snatched them from her hand. He glanced at the license, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face as he saw her name. Dr. Evelyn Reed. He flipped open the registration, then tossed both back onto her lap with contempt. "This ain't your car," he stated, his tone accusatory. "Registration is for a rental company." "Yes, officer. It's a rental," she confirmed calmly. "Folks who rent cars are often trying to hide something," he mused, leaning his arm on her roof and bending down to peer into her car. His gaze swept over the empty back seat, the single duffel bag. "What are you hiding, Evelyn?" The use of her first name was a deliberate, unprofessional jab designed to diminish her. Evelyn's training screamed at her a litany of protocols and warnings. This was the critical juncture. This was where things either calmed down or went very, very wrong. "I'm not hiding anything, officer. I'm just traveling on business." "Business?" Callahan chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He looked back at his partner. Officer Davis, who offered a weak, uncertain smile in return. "What kind of business does a woman like you have in Oak Creek?" The racial undertone was no longer an undertone. It was a blaring klaxon. Evelyn's spine stiffened, but her expression remained unchanged. "I believe that's my private affair, officer. Have I committed a crime? If so, I'd ask you to write the citation. If not, I am free to go." The challenge, polite as it was, lit a fuse in Callahan. The veneer of a routine stop dissolved, revealing the raw aggression beneath. His face hardened, the folksy drawl sharpening into a menacing edge. "You're free to go when I say you're free to go," he snarled. You've got a real mouth on you. You know that a real attitude problem. We don't like that around here. He straightened up and took a half-step back. Step out of the car. Now. This was a major escalation. A traffic stop for weaving did not warrant this. Evelyn's mind raced. He was manufacturing a reason to search the vehicle to assert his power further. Officer, with all due respect, you have no legal cause to order me out of the vehicle for a minor traffic infraction. She was stating fact, but she knew facts didn't matter to a man like Callahan. His reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. I said, get out of the damn car! He roared, his hand flying to his hip. In one fluid, violent motion, Officer Callahan unholstered his Glock, the metallic click echoing in the humid air. He leveled the weapon, the black hole of the barrel aimed directly at her face. Don't tell me about legal cause, he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. I am the law here. The world seemed to slow down. Evelyn could see the tremor in his hand, the flecks of spittle on his lips, the wide, panicked eyes of Officer Davis in the background. The sun glinted off the barrel of the gun. In that moment, all her training, all her degrees, all her authority as a federal agent meant nothing. She was just a black woman in a car staring down the barrel of a gun, held by a man who saw her as less than human. Fear, cold and sharp, finally pierced through her professional calm. But on its heels came something else, a cold, hard resolve. He had just crossed a line from which there was no return. The barrel of the Glock was an unblinking eye, a portal to oblivion just a few feet from her face. Evelyn's training locked into place, a rigid framework that held back the screaming panic. Do not make sudden movements. Keep your voice steady. Your brain is your primary weapon. Officer, there is absolutely no need for this, she said, her voice a marvel of control. It didn't waver. It didn't plead. It stated a fact. The only thing there's a need for is you to get your hands where I can see them and get out of this car before I pull this trigger, Callahan barked. The veins on his neck stood out like cords. From the corner of her eye, she saw Officer Davis shift his weight, his hand hovering near his own weapon, his face pale. Mike, maybe we should just... He began, his voice thin and reedy. Shut up, Davis, Callahan snapped without taking his eyes off Evelyn. Stay back. Evelyn slowly raised her hands from the steering wheel, holding them open and empty in a gesture of surrender. Okay, officer. Okay. I'm going to step out. But first you need to see what's in my purse. I'll see what's in your purse after you're on the ground, he sneered. I really don't think you want to do that, Evelyn said, her tone shifting. The quiet plea was gone, replaced by a note of grave warning. Officer Callahan, I am telling you for your own good, look in the purse on the passenger seat. Something in her voice, some unshakable certainty, gave him a flicker of pause. It wasn't fear. It was authority. He hesitated, the gun wavering for a fraction of a second. What's in the purse? He demanded. My identification, she answered. The only one that matters right now. Callahan glanced at Davis, a silent order passing between them. Davis, looking deeply uncomfortable, slowly opened the passenger door, his eyes never leaving Evelyn. He reached inside his movements, tentative as if expecting a trap, and retrieved her black leather purse. He held it out to Callahan. With his gun still trained on Evelyn's head, Callahan awkwardly took the purse with his left hand. He fumbled with the clasp, his frustration growing. Finally, he ripped it open, turned it upside down, and shook. A wallet, a tube of lipstick, a small notepad, and a set of keys tumbled onto the roof of the Camry. And last, with a soft metallic clink, came a small leather wallet, with a heavy gold-colored medallion embedded in it. It landed face up. The seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed in the Georgia sun. For a moment, there was only the sound of a distant bird and the hum of the patrol car's engine. Davis's eyes widened, a look of dawning horror on his face. He took an involuntary step backward. Callahan stared at the badge. He looked from it to Evelyn's calm, unblinking face and back to the badge. The silence stretched thick with tension. Evelyn thought she saw a flicker of fear, a dawning realization of the catastrophic mistake he had just made. Then he laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a full-throated, belly-deep laugh, filled with derision and disbelief. It was one of the ugliest sounds Evelyn had ever heard. "Oh, that is rich," he howled, shaking his head. "That is just priceless." He scooped up the badge. An FBI agent. "You, honey, where'd you get this cereal box? Did your boyfriend give you a little toy to play with?" He waved the badge in her face. "You think this makes you special? You think this means anything out here? This is my town, my road. That little piece of tin means jack squat." The raw, undiluted racism of his dismissal was staggering. He didn't just doubt her credentials. He found the very idea of her holding such a position to be laughable. It was inconceivable to him that a black woman could be a federal agent. Evelyn's face remained a stone mask, but inside a cold fire was burning. The fear was gone, replaced by an icy professional fury. He wasn't just insulting her. He was insulting the institution she represented, the oath she had sworn. "Officer Callahan," she said, and her voice was now devoid of any warmth. It was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "My name is Special Agent Dr. Evelyn Reed, badge number 734, assigned to the Atlanta field office. You are currently pointing a loaded firearm at a federal officer in the performance of her duties. That is a felony punishable by a minimum of 10 years in a federal prison. Your partner, Officer Davis, is a witness to this assault." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "You have made a grave error in judgment. I am giving you one final opportunity to lower your weapon and place yourself on the ground." Her precision, her recitation of the facts, only seemed to enrage him further. His laughter died, replaced by a furious scowl. "You think you can threaten me?" He spat his face, inches from hers again. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England. To me, you're just another mouthy woman who needs to be taught a lesson in respect." He deliberately left the racial slur hanging in the air, unspoken but perfectly understood. He tossed her badge onto the gravel road. "Now, for the last time, get out of the car." Evelyn met his gaze. There was no reasoning with this man. He was too far gone, blinded by his own bigotry and arrogance. The window for de-escalation had slammed shut. It was time for a different protocol. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't directed at Callahan. It was directed at the small, covert audio-video recorder disguised as a button on her t-shirt, which had been capturing every word, every action, since the moment he approached her car. Then she did something he didn't expect. She looked past him, her eyes focusing on something down the road behind his patrol car. A small, serene smile touched her lips. "No," she said softly. "I don't think I will. But I believe your ride is here." Callahan frowned, confused by her sudden change in demeanor. "What the hell are you talking about?" He started to turn, and in that moment, the quiet afternoon was shattered by a new sound. It wasn't a siren. It was the thunder of powerful engines moving at high speed. Over the crest of the hill, 2 black, unmarked Chevrolet Tahoes appeared, followed by a third. They didn't have their lights on, but they were eating up the asphalt, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Callahan froze his head, half-turned. Officer Davis stared, his mouth agape. The Tahoes screeched to a halt, boxing in the patrol car in a perfect tactical formation. The doors flew open, and a swarm of men erupted from within. They were dressed in black tactical gear, emblazoned with the bold yellow letters FBI. They moved with a silent, synchronized precision that was brutally efficient. Within seconds, they had established a perimeter M4 rifles, held at a low ready, their focus entirely on the 2 local police officers. A tall, imposing man with graying temples and a face carved from granite stepped out of the lead vehicle. He wasn't wearing tactical gear, but a crisp suit that seemed immune to the Georgia heat. This was Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Robert Miller. Evelyn's direct superior and the commander of Operation Southern Shield. He strode forward, his eyes locked on Callahan. His voice boomed across the scene, a crack of thunder that made Callahan flinch. "Officer Callahan, drop your weapon. Drop it now." The world had been turned upside down in less than 20 seconds. Callahan stood frozen. The gun still in his hand, his mind unable to process the sudden, overwhelming shift in power. He looked from the swarm of federal agents to the woman in the car, whose serene expression had not changed. He had laughed at her badge, and now the full, terrifying weight of what that badge represented was descending upon him. The 2 minutes weren't even up. The reality of the situation crashed down on Officer Michael Callahan like a physical blow. The black-clad figures, the rifles, the booming voice of authority that wasn't his own. It was a nightmare made real. His world, once a small kingdom, where his word was law, had shrunk to the space of a few square feet of gravel on the side of a lonely road. "I said, drop it! ASAC." Miller's voice cut through the air again, sharp and absolute, leaving no room for argument. Callahan's hand trembled. The Glock, which had felt like an extension of his own power moments before, now felt impossibly heavy. His gaze darted frantically between Miller and Evelyn, the woman in the car. The agent was watching him. Her expression not of triumph, but of clinical observation, as if he were a specimen under a microscope. His partner Davis reacted first. With a choked sob of panic, he dropped his own sidearm, which clattered onto the gravel. He raised his hands high above his head, his face a mask of pure terror. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" he pleaded. Callahan's mind was a maelstrom of confusion and rage. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a trick, a bluff. But the cold professional readiness of the FBI agents was no bluff. Their eyes were hard, their stances perfect. They were not playing. Finally, with a guttural cry of frustration, Callahan let the Glock fall from his limp fingers. It hit the ground with a dull thud. The moment the weapon was down, 2 tactical agents surged forward. They moved with a terrifying economy of motion. One seized Callahan's arms, wrenching them behind his back with painful force. The other kicked his legs apart, forcing him down onto his knees on the rough gravel. The sting of the sharp stones was a distant sensation compared to the searing humiliation. "You're making a mistake," Callahan bellowed, twisting uselessly against the agent's grip. "She was non-compliant. She threatened me. ASAC." Miller strode right up to him, his expensive leather shoes stopping inches from Callahan's face. He bent down slightly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "The only person who made a mistake here today, officer, was you. and it was the last one you'll make with a badge on. The clink of metal was loud in the sudden quiet. A pair of cold, heavy-duty handcuffs snapped shut around Callahan's wrists. The finality of the sound was absolute. Officer Mike Callahan, the King of Oak Creek, was in cuffs. Simultaneously, our other agents were dealing with Davis. He was also cuffed, though more gently, and was already sobbing, rambling about how he told Mike to calm down, how he didn't want any part of this. Evelyn finally opened her car door and stepped out. She stretched her movements fluid and calm, as if she were merely getting out after a long drive. She walked over to where her badge lay in the dirt, bent down and picked it up. She wiped it clean on her jeans before looking at Miller. "Everything's on camera, Robert," she said, her voice steady. "Audio and video, from the moment he approached the vehicle." Miller nodded, his expression grim. "I never doubted it for a second, Evelyn." "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said, though a slight tremor now ran through her hands, the adrenaline beginning to recede. "He just confirmed our profile. Arrogant, aggressive, and blinded by prejudice. He walked right into it." At that moment, a new vehicle arrived on the scene. This one a standard Oak Creek Police Department cruiser. It skidded to a halt behind the FBI Tahoes, and a large, red-faced man in a chief's uniform lumbered out. Chief Dale Brody was a man whose physical presence was meant to intimidate with a large belly that strained the buttons of his shirt. He took in the scene, his two officers in cuffs, the phalanx of FBI agents, and his face purpled with rage. "What in the hell is going on here?" he bellowed, striding forward with an air of absolute authority. "Who's in charge here?" "ASAC." Miller turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "That would be me, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Robert Miller, FBI." "FBI," Brody scoffed, though a flicker of unease entered his eyes. "What right do you have to interfere with my officers in my jurisdiction? This is a local matter. Uncuff my men. Now." Miller didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Chief Brody, your jurisdiction ends where federal law begins. Your officer, Michael Callahan, just committed a felony assault on a federal officer. That places him squarely in my jurisdiction." "Assault," Brody sputtered. "My officer was conducting a routine traffic stop." "There was nothing routine about it," Evelyn said, stepping forward. She held up her credentials again, this time for the chief to see clearly. "He pulled his weapon on me, without cause, Chief. Are you saying that's standard procedure for the OCPD?" Brody stared at her. Then at the badge, his mind clearly struggling to connect the dots. He looked at Callahan, who was now kneeling in shame and fury. "This is entrapment," Brody declared, pointing a sausage-like finger at Evelyn. "You people came here looking for trouble." "No, Chief," Miller corrected him coolly. "We came here because the trouble was already here. We've been here for months." He let that statement hang in the air, a clear and ominous threat. This traffic stop wasn't the start of our investigation. It was the end of it. A wave of understanding followed by sheer panic washed over Chief Brody's face. This wasn't about one rogue cop. This was bigger, much bigger. His blustering demeanor crumbled, replaced by a sweaty, desperate fear. "Now," Miller continued, his voice like ice, "my agents are going to transport these two individuals to a secure location for processing. You and I are going to have a conversation. I have a federal warrant here for every case file, every piece of evidence in your locker, and every computer in your station for the last 5 years. Operation Southern Shield is now active." He produced a thick sheaf of papers from his jacket and handed it to the stunned chief. The warrant. The legal instrument that would tear his corrupt department apart, piece by piece. "Get them out of here," Miller ordered his team. Agents hoisted the sputtering Callahan to his feet and shoved him towards the back of one of the Tahoes. "You can't do this!" Callahan yelled, his voice cracking. "I'm a police officer. I'm one of you." One of the agents pushing him leaned in close, his voice a low whisper for Callahan's ears alone. "We are nothing like you." He was bundled into the SUV, the door slamming shut with a deafening thud. Davis was led away, similarly, crying openly. Chief Brody stood frozen, the warrant trembling in his hand. He looked at the black SUVs, at the impassive face of Asac Miller, and finally at Special Agent Evelyn Reed. She was no longer just a woman in a car. She was the architect of his doom. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of fear and corruption, with men like Callahan as his loyal knights. Now, in the space of a few minutes, on a sun-drenched Georgia road, it had all been brought down by a woman he and his best officer had dismissed, mocked and threatened, simply because they couldn't see past the color of her skin. The reaping had begun. The makeshift federal command post wasn't in a sterile government building. It was in the rented-out back wing of a nondescript logistics warehouse just outside the Oak Creek town limits. For months, it had been a silent nerve center, buzzing with analysts and agents, building a case brick by meticulous brick. Now it was a hive of activity, the staging ground for the final act. Officer now detainee Michael Callahan sat in a cold, bare interrogation room. The confidence and swagger had evaporated, leaving behind a sullen, terrified man. The handcuffs were gone, but the door was locked, and a hulking FBI agent stood guard outside. Across the metal table from him sat Evelyn Reed. She wasn't in her undercover clothes anymore. She had changed into a sharp navy pantsuit, her hair immaculately styled. She was no longer a potential victim. She was the embodiment of the consequences he now faced. Asac Miller stood against the far wall observing. "I want a lawyer," Callahan mumbled, staring at the table. It was the first thing he'd said in an hour. "You'll get one," Evelyn said smoothly, "but a lawyer can't change what's on this tape." She gestured to a laptop on the table. With a click of the mouse, she played the video from her covert recorder. The scene on the road played out in high-definition clarity. Callahan's condescending questions, his lies about her weaving his sneering dismissal of her profession and culminating in the moment he drew his weapon. Then came the audio of his laugh, that ugly, mocking sound that filled the sterile room. Callahan flinched as if he'd been struck. Hearing it back, stripped of the adrenaline and rage, it sounded pathetic and monstrous. "Assaulting a federal officer with a deadly weapon," Evelyn stated, pausing the video. "That's a 10-year mandatory minimum, Mike. We can call you Mike, right? No lawyer on earth is going to get you out of that. It's on tape." He remained silent, his jaw clenched. "But that's just the appetizer," she continued, her voice calm and surgical. "Let's talk about this main course. Let's talk about the Oak Creek toll." Callahan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm. The Oak Creek toll was the unofficial name he and a few other officers used for their shakedown scheme. Evelyn slid a file across the table. It was thick. "We've been tracking you for a year, Mike. We know all about it. You target out-of-state plates minority drivers. You pull them over on bogus charges. A little bag of marijuana found under their seat. An open container that magically appears. Then you give them a choice face felony charges here in this town, with your friend the DA and your friend the judge, or pay a cash fine directly to you to make it all go away." She opened the file. Inside were surveillance photos. A photo of Callahan taking a thick envelope from a terrified-looking young man by the side of the road. A photo of him meeting with 2 other OCPD officers behind a diner dividing cash. "We have sworn affidavits from 12 of your victims, Mike." People who were brave enough to come forward once they knew we were watching. We have your bank records showing a pattern of cash deposits that far exceed your salary. We have you on wiretap talking to Chief Brody about a good week's haul." Callahan's face went from sullen to ashen grey. He was trapped. This wasn't just about a bad traffic stop. This was his entire life, his entire criminal enterprise laid bare on a table in front of him. "This is a RICO case, Mike," Evelyn said, leaning forward. "Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That carries a 20-year sentence. So right now, you're looking at 30 years best-case scenario. You'll be nearly 80 when you get on out." She let that sink in. She could see the calculations in his eyes, the dawning horror of a life spent behind bars. "However," she said, her tone shifting slightly, "you were a tool, Mike. An important one, but still a tool." The man holding the hammer was Chief Brody. He organized it, he sanctioned it, and he took the biggest cut. He's the one we really want. She pushed a piece of paper and a pen across the table. "You have a choice. You can be the tough guy, take the fall for everyone, and die in prison. Or you can give us a full, detailed confession. Name every officer involved, every prosecutor, every judge who was in on it. Tell us how the money was laundered. Give us Chief Brody on a silver platter. If you do that, if your cooperation is substantial, the U.S. Attorney's Office is prepared to recommend a significantly reduced sentence. Maybe you're out in 5. Still young enough to have some kind of life." Callahan stared at the paper, his breathing ragged. The choice was stark loyalty to a corrupt system that would abandon him or self-preservation. His entire identity was built on being a tough, loyal cop. But the reality of 30 years in a federal penitentiary was a powerful motivator. While Evelyn dealt with Callahan ASAC, Miller was in the adjacent room observing the interrogation of Officer Davis. The younger officer had folded almost immediately. He sat with a federal public defender weeping as he recounted not just today's incident, but numerous other stops he had witnessed. He was terrified, but he was also unburdening a guilty conscience. "Callahan. He called it weeding the garden," Davis sobbed. "He said they were people who wouldn't be missed, that we were doing the town a service. Chief Brody knew everything. He encouraged it. He had us plant evidence on a guy last year, a community activist who was trying to get a civilian oversight board established. They sent him to prison for 5 years on a bogus drug charge." Davis provided names, dates, and locations. He was the key that unlocked everything, corroborating the evidence the FBI had already gathered and filling in the gaps. Back in Callahan's room, the former King of Oak Creek finally broke. With a shaking hand, he picked up the pen. His loyalty, it turned out, was only as strong as his freedom. He began to talk, and once he started, he couldn't stop the words tumbling out in a torrent of confession and blame, a desperate attempt to save himself by sacrificing everyone else. At the same time, a fleet of FBI vehicles descended on the Oak Creek Police Department. Agents swarmed the building armed with the warrant Chief Brody was still staring at in disbelief on the side of the road. They seized computers, files, and evidence. The few officers on duty who weren't part of the scheme watched in stunned silence. The ones who were in on it tried to look busy, their faces pale with terror. The final domino fell 2 hours later. Based on the corroborating testimony of Callahan and Davis, combined with the pre-existing wiretap evidence, ASAC Miller had more than enough for the final arrest. FBI agents walked into Chief Dale Brody's office. He was on the phone, presumably with the town's lawyer, yelling and demanding action. He looked up as the agents entered, his face contorting in fury. "Get out of my office!" he roared. An agent simply held up a new warrant. Dale Brody. You are under arrest for conspiracy racketeering and deprivation of rights under color of law. The chief seemed to deflate all the air going out of him. He sank into his chair, a broken man. The kingdom had crumbled. The unraveling was complete. The wheels of federal justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The months following the arrests in Oak Creek were a public spectacle of disgrace. The story of the arrogant cop who pulled a gun on the very FBI agent investigating him became a national headline, a cautionary tale of hubris and prejudice. But for Evelyn Reed and her team, the headline was just the beginning. The real work was in ensuring the karma delivered was not just swift, but lasting and profound. Michael Callahan, in exchange for his full cooperation, received a sentence of 7 years in a federal medium security prison. For some, it seemed lenient. But the karma that hit him was more than just prison time. It was the complete annihilation of his identity. He wasn't just an inmate. He was an ex-cop in a system filled with men he'd put away. He was a pariah to both sides of the law. His tough guy reputation was a liability marking him as a target. His first year at FCI Jessup was brutal. He was isolated, constantly looking over his shoulder. The respect and fear he had commanded in Oak Creek were gone, replaced by contempt. His wife Sharon, who had once looked at him as a hero, filed for divorce within 6 months of his sentencing. She sold their house, packed up their 2 children, and moved to another state, changing her name to escape the shame he had brought upon them. He received a single letter from her, its contents searing themselves into his memory. The man I married was a protector. I don't know the monster who laughed while pointing a gun at a woman's head. Our children will not be raised knowing that monster is their father. He lost not just his freedom, but his past and his future. Chief Dale Brody refused any deal, confident that his political connections and a high-priced legal team could save him. He was wrong. The evidence against him, fortified by Callahan's and Davis's testimony, was insurmountable. The trial was a painful dissection of his corrupt reign. The jury convicted him on all counts, the judge citing Brody's gross abuse of public trust and his role as the architect of the conspiracy, sentenced him to 25 years with no possibility of parole. Brody, a man in his late 50s with a host of health problems, would die in prison. His assets were seized. His pension was revoked, and his name became a synonym for corruption in Georgia law enforcement history. The karma cascaded downwards. 4 other OCPD officers were indicted. The local district attorney was forced to resign in disgrace for his role in prosecuting cases based on planted evidence, narrowly avoiding charges himself by cooperating with the state bar investigation, which ultimately disbarred him. The activist who had been framed was exonerated and released from prison, his record expunged. He filed a civil suit against the town of Oak Creek that resulted in a multi-million-dollar settlement paid for by the taxpayers who had for so long turned a blind eye to the rot in their midst. The town itself faced a reckoning. The Confederate statue in the town square, long a symbol of pride for some and oppression for others, became a focal point of protests and heated town hall meetings. The scandal forced the community to confront the ugly prejudices they had allowed to fester under the guise of tradition and keeping the peace. Evelyn Reed followed the fallout from a distance, already assigned to a new case in a different state. Justice for her wasn't about personal revenge. It was about the systematic dismantling of a corrupt institution. Yet there was one final scene she allowed herself to witness. About a year after the arrests, she drove through Oak Creek again. This time she was in her own car, a sleek, modern sedan. She wore a sharp business dress, the picture of the professional she was. The town looked different. The air of smug self-satisfaction was gone, replaced by a more sober, uncertain atmosphere. The police cars were a new part of a fleet purchased by the U.S. Department of Justice as part of their consent decree to oversee the complete reformation of the police department. The new police chief was a black woman from Atlanta, a reformer with a reputation for fairness and transparency. Evelyn parked across from the town square. She saw a moving truck outside a modest home. A woman and 2 children were loading boxes. Evelyn recognized them from the case file. It was Sharon Callahan and her kids leaving their old life behind for good. There was no anger on the woman's face, just a profound, weary sadness. In that moment, Evelyn felt the full weight of the story. It wasn't a simple tale of good versus evil. It was a messy human tragedy, born of arrogance, prejudice, and a system that enabled it. Callahan's actions had not only destroyed his own life, but had also irrevocably damaged his family and scarred his community. His personal karma was not just a prison cell. It was the knowledge that he had become the very thing he claimed to be fighting against, a source of chaos, pain, and injustice. He had lost his legacy, his family, and his soul on the side of that lonely road, all because he couldn't see a woman, only a color and a target for his hate. The justice was hard, but it was also complete. The scales, so violently tilted, had finally been balanced. 2 years had passed since the day the Oak Creek Police Department had imploded under the weight of its own corruption. 2 years yet for Special Agent Evelyn Reed. The echo of Officer Callahan's mocking laughter sometimes surfaced in the quiet moments. It was a phantom sound, a reminder of the ugly, visceral reality that lay beneath the surface of case files and legal statutes. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated prejudice, and it served as a permanent fuel for the fire in her gut. She sat in her office at the Atlanta field office, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across her desk. A half-empty mug of coffee had gone cold beside her elbow. Spread before her were the initial intelligence reports for a new assignment codenamed Operation Ironwood, centered on a sheriff's department in rural Alabama. The patterns were eerily familiar. A disproportionate number of traffic stops involving minorities, whispered rumors of roadside fines, and a charismatic, untouchable sheriff beloved by the local populace. The work, it seemed, was a relentless tide. A sharp knock on her open door pulled her from her thoughts. ASAC Robert Miller stood there, a folded copy of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in his hand. His face, usually a stoic mask of command, held a rare, faint smile. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, stepping inside and placing the paper on her desk. "Front page of the state section." Evelyn unfolded it. The headline was bold, "Oak Creek 2 years later. A town's painful path to reformation." Below it was a picture of a bustling town square, children playing near a newly installed fountain where the divisive statue once stood. She scanned the article, her eyes absorbing the words. It detailed the sweeping changes under the DOJ's consent decree, a slow and often contentious process of healing. The article quoted the new police chief, Alicia Mendez, a veteran from Atlanta, brought in to clean house. "We're not just changing policies, we're changing a culture," Mendez was quoted as saying. "It's about building trust, one interaction at a time. It's about ensuring that every citizen, regardless of their background, sees a uniform and feels safe, not scared." Further down, a local barber, an older black man named Franklin, shared his perspective. "For years, you'd clutch the wheel a little tighter when a cruiser passed. You taught your sons to be extra polite, to never give them a reason. Now, it's getting better. My boy was heading home from work late last week, got a flat tire. One of the new officers stopped, helped him change it in the dark. Didn't ask for nothing. Just helped. That's a start, a real start. Evelyn felt a knot in her chest loosen. This was the result, the tangible proof that the fight was worth it. Miller, watching her read, provided more color. Brody's legal appeals all ran out 6 months ago. His health is failing. He's been moved to the medical wing at USP Atlanta. He spends his days in a wheelchair, staring at a concrete wall. He paused. As for Callahan, he's a ghost in the system. After his testimony, helped us indict 2 state-level officials who were protecting Brody. We moved him to a WITSEC unit in a federal facility out west. He lives in permanent protective custody. For an ex-cop, that's a fate worse than death. And Davis, Evelyn asked, folding the paper carefully. Paroled after 18 months. Good behavior and his testimony helped. Our field office in Miami ran a check on him for us. He's a certified mechanic in a small town near the Everglades. He's estranged from his family, keeps to himself. But his lawyer told us something interesting. Every month without fail, he sends a money order to a victims' compensation fund we set up for the Oak Creek community. It's not much, but he's never missed a payment. Evelyn contemplated that. Not forgiveness, but a form of penance. A man trying to balance the scales of his own life, one small act at a time. It was a more complex, more human outcome than a simple tally of prison sentences. Justice was the big, sweeping change, but atonement was personal quiet and perhaps more profound. She found her mind drifting to the trial, specifically to the testimony of Marcus Thorne, the community activist who had been framed. He hadn't been angry on the stand. He had been filled with a deep, sorrowful dignity as he described what it felt like to have his reputation, his freedom and 3 years of his life stolen from him, all for trying to make his hometown a better place. They didn't just lock me up. He had told the jury, his voice steady. They tried to lock up the idea that this town could be better. But ideas don't have prison cells. That was the core of it. They hadn't just been fighting corrupt men. They had been fighting a toxic idea. Miller gestured to the new files on her desk. Operation Ironwood. See the similarities. It's the Oak Creek playbook, chapter and verse. She confirmed, her professional focus snapping back. A charismatic leader, a culture of impunity and a community too afraid to speak up. But, she added, tapping a specific report, they're getting sloppy. They think they're untouchable, just like Callahan did. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. The experience with Callahan had changed her. The cold academic approach of the forensic psychologist had been permanently fused with the visceral memory of a gun in her face. It had taught her that you couldn't just analyze the monster. You had to understand the environment that created it and the arrogance that fueled it. Oak Creek had taught her patience, and it had taught her exactly where to apply pressure to make the whole rotten structure collapse. This time, she said, turning back to Miller, we start with the money. We follow the cash from the roadside to wherever they're washing it, and we put a quiet team on the ground, collecting stories, building trust with the Franklins of their town before we make a single move. We won't give their sheriff a chance to become a martyr. We'll dismantle his reputation before we ever put a cuff on him. A look of deep respect settled on Miller's face. He saw not just a brilliant agent, but a leader forged in fire. The floor is yours, Evelyn. Whatever you need. I'm ready, she said, and the words carried a new weight. They weren't just a statement of professional readiness. They were a personal affirmation. The echoes of the past no longer haunted her. They informed her. The work was endless. The road was long, but she knew the way. And she was ready to walk it again. The story of Special Agent Evelyn Reed and Officer Callahan is a stark reminder that true authority isn't derived from a badge or a weapon, but from integrity and the law. It's a powerful illustration of how deep-seated prejudice can lead to a catastrophic downfall, and how the calm resolve of one person can bring an entire corrupt system to its knees. This wasn't just about one man's karma. It was about the restoration of justice for an entire community that had suffered in silence for too long. If this story of accountability and hard-hitting karma resonated with you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with others who need to hear that no one is above the law. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us continue to bring you compelling stories of justice served, ensuring these important narratives are seen and heard. Thank you for watching.